Hey, welcome to the Ron Johnson Discipleship Podcast.
We are so excited that you chose to join us today. Thanks for tuning in and listening and spending a half an hour or so with us as we try to talk about really, really important issues. And our challenge these days is how to narrow them down. There are so many things to talk about, so many important issues going on. Probably top of the list would be the fact that by the time you hear our next podcast, we will have experienced a midterm election. And that, of course, is coming up in about a week. And midterm elections, as I shared in my sermon on Sunday, when something happens that impacts the entire population of the United States of America, it's kind of important. So we're encouraging people to be educated, get out, vote, do your civic duty, and make sure you get out and...
Yeah, I mean, I think this past Sunday you addressed why is it so important for us on a Sunday service at church, address these issues, talk about the importance of election, talk about the importance of freedom, you know?
Yeah, I joke around because pastors have their own little things, and one of them is like, do you preach expositionally, meaning verse by verse through a certain book or certain chapter, or do you preach topically? And there's merit to both. I love to preach expositionally. I know you do too. It's great to go verse by verse through a book or through a chapter. But there are times when, I believe anyway, you need to just like pause if that's your normal flow, because like a national election is huge. And if you look historically, pastors in the pulpits historically have stood there and preached and connected dots between the issues that were going on in the nation and the character of the people who were seeking to be elected. In other words, the pulpit was open and uncensored, and pastors talked about things that were important. And I joked around, do you want to talk about something that's going to impact every single American, or do you want to continue on your series on the book of Leviticus? Nothing wrong with Leviticus, but it has nothing to do right now with what's going on in our nation on a larger scale. Right. And so that's why I think pastors have to make choices, again, not to preach from the newspapers, that's getting everything turned upside down, but we need to know when to pause and when to speak to issues that every one of the people in our churches on Sunday are facing. And that's what we try to do it every year. And last Sunday we had our first volley. We'll have our second volley this Sunday.
Yeah, I thought it's important that we address why this is not a political issue for us. This is a kingdom issue. And I love that you brought up how Jesus is the king of every realm. And we are extension of his kingdom, and as ambassadors of his kingdom, we ought to try to enact his policy, his principles in every realm, including the governmental realm. Of course, his kingdom is not violence or swords.
Yeah, but and that's where people freak out when they start talking about theocracy and everything. They picture a bunch of Christians running around with submachine guns, and we're forcing everybody to swear on the Bible or something like that, which is absolutely ludicrous. The way the kingdom advances is through sharing of the good news of the gospel and through the Holy Spirit working in people's hearts. You can't force people to love Jesus. You can't force people to believe God's word. No. And I don't think there's any...
Unlike the other side, we don't use the strong arm of the government to try to change people's heart and change people's conscience. But I think an important principle in all of this is whenever you vote or whenever any politician, they bring with them a kingdom. Absolutely. And I think you mentioned this in your sermon. There's a kingdom.
There is no neutral ground.
There's no neutral ground.
Yeah.
And we just need to make sure, as followers of Jesus Christ, are we following the gospel of the kingdom? Are we taking our king's principles and applying how we vote?
And much of what happens politically is good for your party, but not good for the common good. The nature of the gospel is it's good for everyone. Yeah. Now, everybody doesn't believe that, but the purpose of a Christian getting involved is that we care about true justice, not social justice, like we talked about last podcast. We care about true justice, which is creating a common ground where everybody experiences the blessings of the King and the kingdom. Yeah. And we know, we're not naive. We know this is not going to come in perfection until Christ returns. We still deal with sin. We still deal with sinful people, ourselves included, selfishness, all that messes everything up. But nevertheless, we should not be self-silencing, self-censoring, sitting out, because as we said, when the public square becomes naked, in other words, you try to take out all ideologies, right, all religion, and it's a secular public square, supposedly, it does not stay empty for very long. Some other ideology is going to fill that vacuum, and it's time that we awaken to that and realize if we don't have Christian people leading, Christian people running, people who love God's word, people who promote God's truth, then there's going to be somebody else filling that office, and I guarantee you they're going to bring their worldview with them every day to work. So,
and our question is, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, then do you actually believe in his worldview? Do you actually believe that his reign, the reign of Christ, the principle of his kingdom, all the things Jesus talked about, all the parables, those principles is actually better. It's better than every other worldview, every other kingdom in the world.
And that's what
if
this
not,
podcast...
why are you following Christ?
Well, exactly. You need to believe in something that you really believe in, not just say you believe in.
Right.
But that's been really the foundation of this podcast, is we are committed to proclaiming the superiority of the Christian worldview above any other worldview. And we do that not in arrogance or boastfulness, but it's like, if you don't believe what you're living, find something better. And so we're firmly committed to that truth, that the gospel is good for you, it's good for me, it's good for everyone.
Yeah, extend to every realm. It's not just government, education, healthcare, science,
and I think it was John Calvin who made the comment. He said, your governor will impact through his or her decision-making and policies every single citizen of your state. Me, for instance, as a pastor of Indiana, I impact a small segment of Hoosiers. The governor impacts every Hoosier. Should we not be concerned, he said, with those who we elect to represent us? Yeah. I mean, of course we should. It's about authority and power and influence, and the scope of that is serious. And we just need to. That's what we encourage people: get registered to vote. I shared Sunday. It's tragic that there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 million evangelicals who believe in Jesus, believe in the gospel, believe in the second coming, believe in the Word of God, and don't vote, aren't registered to vote.
I think the number that was Bob McEwen.
Yeah,
he shared with us, and that was a great talk, by the way. He shared with us 80 million evangelicals in America. Half of them are not registered to vote, and the half that are registered to vote, only half of them vote.
Right.
So if you do the math, only out of the 80 million, only 20 million vote.
Yeah, which is devastating. That's why we're in the mess that we're in. And so this Sunday, I encourage you, if you're nearby or you can listen online, I'm going to be talking about the responsibility. We talked about sovereignty last week, that heaven rules, and that's good news for us. Yeah. We can trust that God is working out his larger purposes in all situations. But the second part of that in covenant is personal responsibility. It's not all God. There are certain things that he expects from us, and we're going to talk about what those responsibilities are, especially as it relates to national elections. Amen. So I'm excited about that. Yeah. We're talking about some really, really important things. We've been using Rod Dreher's book, Live Not by Lies, a phenomenal book. And we're walking through that, and we're going to talk today about woke capitalism. Woke capitalism. I don't know if that word woke a couple years ago, if that would have even been in our vocabulary, but it is definitely firmly entrenched in American vocabulary now. Yeah. What's fascinating about this book is he's interviewing people from Eastern Europe, post-Soviet Union satellite countries, that were under Stalin's rule. And he's talking to them about the parallels about what they see happening in America today. And they make the comment that one of the unique things about communist countries was there was no personal space or freedom. So if you're living in your apartment under Stalin and under communism, there is a really good chance that your apartment is bugged. There are people listening to you. There are people watching you. Of course, now, even in communist China with all the surveillance cameras, there's very little personal space or personal freedom. Somebody, Big Brother, is always watching. And they said how horrible that was. And then they created this socialistic citizen whose job was to basically turn in their neighbors whenever they saw divergent viewpoints. In other words, if you disagreed with the orthodoxy of the state, if you disagreed with if you went off script, you were penalized, and you were turned in. And so you not only have government watching you, you have your neighbor watching you. And they're saying what a dreadful, situation this was when you have no personal space of your own. And the irony, of course, is in America, nobody's surveilling us in terms of hidden cameras or whatever in our homes.
Right.
We are opening ourselves up to being surveilled by our government simply for ease and comfort, and because we like all the latest, greatest, technologies. Explain that a little bit. I thought that was incredibly interesting.
And so these people who are survivors of communist regimes, when they found out how Americans are inviting Siri or what's the Amazon one, the little pod that you have in your house, Alexa, turn off my light. Alexa, what's the temperature outside? And they're inviting these technology. She was just appalled. Right. Because she lived under the regime, which she had to rip off secret cameras or secret microphones in her houses because the secret police were listening on everything they did. Yeah. And Americans are openly inviting surveillance into their homes, Yeah,
and we're probably both guilty. If we got anybody that has the modern technology, you don't realize that your smart devices are listening all the time, and they're sending data to the internet, and people are gathering that data, and we'll get into that in a little bit.
I'm not a social media guy. I don't have time or energy for that personally. I understand it's a good tool for advertising and whatnot, but just I don't personally use it. So I was like, oh, I'm kind of exempt from this. And then he started going through the list. I have one of those things I plug in my car. So they can track how safe I drive to save a few dollars on insurance, right? And they're like, they know everywhere you go. They know how fast you drive.
Your frugality was going to be the noose that
and he even said, so you can save a few bucks on insurance. I'm like, oh my goodness, he's talking about me.
Now they know, but they know where you're driving. They know where you're getting your gas. Yeah. They know what your routine is. They know where you shop.
Absolutely. Having a smartphone, we all know your smartphone listens to you. You're there talking about, I want to lose a few pounds, and all of a sudden you're on YouTube and this, commercial for whatever, Weight Watchers, whatever pops up, and you're like, wait a second.
Sit up exercises to strengthen your core. Yeah. All that good stuff. Well, it's interesting. He gave an interesting analysis, I guess, of where woke capitalism came from. For Americans, we've always, and this is unusual for Americans, but we've always questioned our government. We've been suspicious of our government in a healthy way because we realize that, and this probably comes from our Judeo-Christian worldview, a concentration of power is never good. And I shared this Sunday, the greatest threat to all of our liberties is a secular government. That doesn't respect God, doesn't respect our...
Look at history. Historically, what is the greatest threat to mankind? It's
always government.
These corrupt government.
But we always put more confidence in corporate America because corporate America seemed to be conservative for the most part. It was private business. They operated, so we thought anyway, on a higher level of ethics.
We think capitalism kind of allows things to even out a little bit and kind of has some check and balances, right?
Yeah, internally.
So we think that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so if we said what's more virtuous, government or corporate America, we would have voted for corporate America, being at a higher standard.
Well, it turns out greed and corruption and power has no ends. It goes everywhere, not just government. Yeah.
And who would have thought that with the rise, especially of the IT world, we have some global American corporations that are just incredibly powerful and have created the amount of wealth and influence that they have is unbelievable. In fact, let's talk about some of these. He says an elite club of global mega corporations are more powerful than many countries, and he gives some good examples here. Walmart has more annual revenue than the whole nation of Spain, and more than twice as much as Russia. Now that's crazy. We think of Russia as being this big superpower, but economically they're not that strong. Walmart has twice as much annual revenue than the nation of Russia. ExxonMobil is bigger revenue-wise than India, Norway, or Turkey. And how about this one? Apple has more cash than 2/3 of the world's nations. That's just stunning.
That's crazy.
And so here you have corporate America or certain businesses that have so much wealth and power that they actually have more power than state, it's governments of the world, nations of the world. So that has probably never happened in human history as it's happening right now. That's a massive shift. And here's the IT Big Five. In an America that now runs on the internet, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. Those five have a massive influence over American life and especially private life, our private lives.
Yep.
So what we're seeing is as big business as it gotten bigger, it continues to move toward the left, which is a massive correction from where we used to be. We used to be able to rely, even politically, from conservative to liberal. You used to be able to rely on corporate America to side with conservative values. That's not the case anymore, and that's part of the problem that we're running into.
Yep.
And he said standard business practice a long time ago required that businesses stay out of controversial issues because they didn't want to do anything that would hurt their brand. Now you have to be involved in some type of social issue or else you lose legitimacy with the culture today.
Yep.
In fact, this young generation says if your capitalism does not serve some purpose or some noble cause, then your company's basically worthless. All right. So, and again, Christian capitalism, we would understand the goal is to serve people, is to be a blessing. But now we got all these liberal causes that companies are supposed to sign off on, or they lose their legitimacy in the eyes of the world today. And let's talk a little bit about the big RIFRA thing, because that's kind of up close and personal. I thought it was interesting that he talks about it in his book, the Indiana 2015 RIFRA situation.
Yeah, you want to explain the background, the context?
Well, sure. What we saw happening as America and as corporate America got more leftist is there was a push or a honoring of LGBT rights over religious liberty. Now, of course, LGBT rights are nowhere in our Constitution or in any of our founding documents. They were invented. But what's clearly in our Constitution is the right to religious liberty.
Yep.
And it's foundational. That right comes from God. And so what was happening is you might be a Christian business owner and you're asked, for instance, to bake the cake for the gay wedding, but it violates your Christian beliefs. In the past in America, we would say, hey, we need to honor people's religious beliefs, and you can't force somebody to violate their conscience, et cetera, and encourage the folks to go to a baker that catered to their needs. That would have been a simple solution to the problem. That was no longer acceptable, and now we were finding Christians being sued for simply not going along with the sexual revolution. Well, Indiana tried to stay ahead of all that, and it wasn't just Indiana, it was a lot of states. Yep. They were passing these religious liberty protection laws that were not intended to be a club to attack LGBT people. It was simply to be a shield to protect Christians in the marketplace from assaults from those who did not share their views on sexual ethics. And so our governor at the time, Mike Pence, along with our legislature, passed a stellar religious liberty bill that protected the rights of Christians in the marketplace. I mean, it was
and mind you, that bill mirrored the same bill passed federally, Religious Freedom Restoration Act, by Bill Clinton, correct?
Absolutely. It shows you how left we've gone.
Yeah.
And it passed overwhelmingly
by Congress and signed by Bill Clinton.
Yeah,
that was
Bill
the same
Clinton,
language.
Democrat. Yep. And so this was not a radical piece of legislation, like you said. It was really a state version of a federal bill that had already passed.
Yeah.
And what happened was something we had never seen in the history, really, of America. All of corporate America descended upon Indiana. Yeah. Started attacking our governor, started attacking our state, the people of our state, and basically saying, look, if you guys don't backtrack on this bill, we're going to use, economic threats against you. And some of the bullies at the time were Apple, Salesforce, Eli Lilly. Basically, they said, we're going to have economic retaliation against the state if you don't back off. Of course, we had the NCAA offices there.
Everybody was universities.
Oh yeah, everybody was threatening that they were going to cancel all the conferences, and it was going to cost the state gazillions of dollars. That's always the economic threats. You're going to lose, gazillions of dollars. But it was just crazy, the vitriol, because what you had there is you had the LGBT activists, you had the media, you had corporate America. All really, I called it an unholy trinity alliance just descending upon the good people of the state of Indiana and calling us, bigots and haters and discriminators and all this kind of stuff. And what happened, I still remember, we sat down for a nice meal to celebrate with people who had been working very hard on this legislation. And it was a great feeling of satisfaction that this had passed. It was a good piece of legislation. And within a week's time, everything was stripped, and basically the bill was completely gutted of any substance. In fact, some people said it actually became a pro-LGBT bill instead of what it was intended to do in the first place.
Yeah.
And obviously it hurt our governor tremendously because it felt like a massive betrayal for social conservatives, which was his base. I can't imagine what he was going through, the pressure and everything. But what was especially disappointing was the way that our leadership in the state caved. We had a supermajority of people who share our values and just absolutely caved under the pressure of big media.
Yeah, I remember that clearly. That was a traumatic moment for me because that was like wow, I didn't realize. It was literally like the right moment with the convergence of all these different forces that have been scheming, planning for years and decades, and all of a sudden they show their true colors.
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about NCAA, we're talking about college coaches come out speaking against something that as simple as religious liberty. To anybody, it still just boggles my mind. I don't know if they were just told the line that they were given, or do they truly feel that way? Every single corporation, every governing official, I mean, it was just like, wow, this little thing called First Amendment about freedom of religion, it's so so harmful, so threatening to your agenda that everyone that came out. But it was an awakening moment for me because until that point, I still thought a lot of these sports teams or businesses still were just going to stay neutral. At the very least, stay neutral, right?
Well, and that's what this has been the big shift. Before, you would think, you know what? Look, we manufacture tennis shoes, or we make Gatorade, or I don't know what it is, but it's like we don't need to jump into a controversial political issue. Yeah. Let's just stay doing what we do. We make Coca-Cola, but all of these things, all of these companies, again, because of the change in the ideology, now believe that they must jump on board and use their clout. And so now we have, the NBA basketball, we have NFL was involved. We had basically every major team had to wear the slogans on their shirts or on the floor. I mean, everybody feels like if you're an athlete or you're an actor, you are a social activist, social justice crusader.
So it's interesting because that to me is when politics really got ugly.
Yeah.
When things start, it's like no holds barred. You are win at all costs because I think at that time Mike Pence and some of these other guys in the legislature were not ready for it. This really is opening the door for the Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis type that comes in who are saying we're not going to run. No longer are the statesmen who's going to wear your nice tie and have that civil conversation. You're getting into a wrestling match now. If you get into politics.
No, you're exactly right. And what happened was, you can't deal with these issues in sound bites. For instance, people throw out the word to Hoosiers accusing us of being discriminatory. Well, okay, wait a minute. What does discriminatory mean? Everybody in the world makes discriminations. We make choices. We make judgments. Right. We make a discrimination on whether or not we're going to, go out for McDonald's or we're going to go out, for Wendy's. That's a discrimination. We make a choice. What they were saying is that somehow we're evil people because we make discriminations, and there was no logical debate. There was no look at the bill. It was just name. Yeah,
you bring up some people members. I remember Mike Pence went on to whatever show it was, and his defense was basically, "Well, I don't discriminate. I don't discriminate." Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking, watching him saying, "Yes, you do." Don't buy into their language. Everybody's discriminate. The NBA is discriminating against us. Eli Lilly is discriminating against right now. Everybody discriminate. He should go up there and say, well, what do you mean? Everyone makes decisions. Everyone has to balance things and make decisions, make choices. Yeah. Yes, we're simply making a choice in this direction. Everyone discriminate. Man, that would be such much more powerful, forceful defense of this than going out and buying the language of the other side and basically saying, you know, well, I'm going to tie into whatever they say.
But as we've talked about, it's really about raw power. So if you're an NBA star and you weigh in on it, even though you've had zero training and you don't know any of the facts, but you throw your persona, right? Then that adds weight to it. If you're this gigantic company, you know, that's well known and on commercials all over, and your brand is well known, and your corporate president says, you know, the script, oh, well, it must be bad. You know, we've lost the civil discourse. We've lost the public policy people wrestling with issues.
In those cases, you know, it's no longer about what is logical, what is right. It's like you said, it's about power, right? It's about if I'm going to interview you from the news media, I'm going to play the gotcha game. I'm not really trying to hear your side. And what's happening right now, you know, you have your Kerry Lakes, your Ron DeSantis, your Donald Trumps. They're not playing that game anymore. Yeah. You don't go to politics. When you have someone interview you, your shields are hard. You're not being vulnerable. You're not really sharing what's going on. I hear some of the exchange between Kerry Lake and CNN. I mean, she's dishing it right back to them because she's no longer playing their game.
Yeah, because they've done that for years.
And that was the beginning, which our sides was kind of like, whoa, what is going on here? So, man, I mean, that's what, 2015? It's only been, 7 years? Yeah, how things have changed.
Things have escalated.
Wow.
And you know, the author, Roger Eyre, points out, too, that nearly 90% of Fortune 500 companies have diversity offices. And that diversity office is all about equity, diversity, inclusion. We talked about those 3 words and what those words mean, which means this whole woke capitalistic ideology is being forced upon corporate America. Even from the place where you're being hired for a job, what are they looking at? They're going to go to your social media account. They're going to look at your likes. They're going to look at the data they can mine from your life. Yeah. Oh, you're a church attender. Oh, you voted for so-and-so. Oh, you like so-and-so. All of that is used to determine whether or not you fit, the company's, values. And if those values are leftist and liberal and progressive, you're gonna be canceled before you even knew you were canceled.
So again, I think I mentioned last week. You know, I'm very passionate about this topic because of my passion for the marketplace. You know, for me, woke capitalism came out from a vacuum in which, for years, for decades, we have compartmentalized anything meaningful or spiritual with capitalism. The church has, or Christians have. You know, capitalism is the business workplace about making money, providing for your family. But you leave out anything transcendent.
Yeah, and you bring out a good point. You know, everything that we're dealing with now largely comes from a failure of the church to promote the truth in terms of, like you said, in terms of capitalism. The transcendent purpose of capitalism is to bless other people. It's to raise the water level, so to speak, of everybody.
Right.
And when you lose that, and it becomes nothing about but about making the bottom line, big money, et cetera, exploiting people, massive layoffs, all that kind of stuff, all for the sake of the dollar. People get disgusted with that. Even people that don't know the Lord get disgusted with that injustice.
I think the problem is, you take out the kingdom of God. You take out the theology of God's kingdom. So even Christians don't have a theology of how to operate in the marketplace, because you take kingdom out, it's just evangelism. It's just salvation. You're saved. Now what? There's nothing to do. You're going to go to heaven. You wait for, you die, go to heaven. There's nothing. There's no greater mission. So even the Christians buy into these woke ideologies because it gives them a mission, because they realize just greed and money is not enough to motivate. There's a ton of business books that comes out and says the best way to motivate people is not money. Right. It's to give them a cause. Yeah. So if you want people who's going to work the hardest, most loyal to your company, give them a cause. And there's no compelling cause out there given by the church or Christians. So they hop onto woke ideology.
And this is the counterfeit cause. This is Larry Fink, CEO of global investment company BlackRock. He says, quote, "Society is demanding that companies, both public and private, serve a social purpose or cause," as you just said. Yeah. To prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. Now, this, apart from Christ, is humanism at its best. It's the Tower of Babel.
But this is super sad to me, because it tells us that we have dropped the ball to say, hey, here's a compelling biblical positive contribution. We as a church can contribute to our culture, to the world, to nations, beyond just getting people saved and saved a prayer. There's a compelling kingdom message in which, we're going to have, today's Thursday, so tomorrow we're going to have the Avada conference, and that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Is the compelling message that the Bible, that Jesus Christ gave, is a message of his kingdom to go and take over. Again, through his principle, not with guns and swords,
right,
but with the message of his goodness and his grace.
Yeah. And maybe that'd be a good thing we could get into in the podcast upcoming is, I guess, digesting a little bit about that Avada conference, because I know there's going to be a ton of amazing content for that, especially as it relates to kingdomizing your business, bringing a Christ-centered purpose to your life.
But this to me is the decades of us. Maybe even centuries of us dropping the ball, and then now they're like, "Well, you weren't there to give us a cause," and here, and there's a counterfeit cause that fits all these things to a T.
And I think this book points out, which is the irony of it all, is that American young people today are much more sympathetic to socialism than ever before.
Yeah.
And people coming from socialist countries who have watched their nations destroyed and watched the poverty and the misery levels increase. They're like, what is the matter with you Americans? Why can't you see it? But I think, again, it's that empty, materialistic pursuit of money for money's sake, pleasure for pleasure's sake, that causes people who have tasted of that to realize there's got to be something more.
Right.
And it's interesting, a lot of the folks leading these socialistic charges are rich, spoiled rich kids who have never been introduced to Christ or transcendent purpose for their life. And they realize it's not he who dies with the most toys that wins. There's got to be more to life. And so they're finding radical causes, whether it's climate, whether it's abortion,
right,
LGBT, whatever it is, race issues, whatever the cause is. And so they're willing to jettison capitalism, which has been responsible for producing the greatest wealth, prosperity, blessing in human history, throw that out the window for something that looks and feels like it's going to be a better alternative, which is really a lie. In the end, it's devastating.
I was talking to a great man, and he said, someone comes to a pastor, any pastor, and says, "I'm going to give you $1 million. If I give you $1 million, what would you do with it? What vision do you have it to better our world?"
Yeah.
Most pastors won't really have a response,
right?
Because the compelling cause can't be just like, "Well, I want to increase my church's budget. I want to pay myself a nice vacation, buy myself a boat." That's not compelling cause to change the world. Do we, as leaders in the church or leaders, of God's kingdom, have a compelling cause with resources and abilities and infrastructure to make the world a better place based on God's principle?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Yeah. And there's a lot of idealistic young folks who want to go out and make their mark in the world.
Yeah.
Praise God for it. The problem is, if it's not rooted in Christ's kingdom, it's in the end it's going to be delusion and deception and disaster.
Absolutely.
I guess one thing just to transition for next week is this whole rise of what they're calling surveillance capitalism.
Yeah.
You and I touched on it. I was amazed. I was talking with a good friend, missionary of ours, who was serving in communist China for a couple of decades. And he started telling me, this was back in like 2014, something like that, about this whole notion in China of creating a social credit system. I was dumbfounded about it when he started talking about it, and we won't get into it for the rest of this podcast, but we'll just introduce it. But basically, the concept is the Chinese government, communist Chinese government, has so many surveillance monitors, cameras all over the nation, and monitoring, of course, the internet. Basically, they monitor just about everything they can of a citizen's life. And they create a social credit report card, basically, based on a whole group of points. And they measure all kinds of things about your life. If there's any deviation with your life and, for instance, the communist Chinese ideology, that is recognized. So, for instance, if you keep going to church, a Christian church, that's not something the communists value, obviously. They're atheistic, and that is noted. If you share something on social media that goes against the communist Chinese government, that's monitored. That all goes against your social credit score, and your social credit score is basically, here's the ideal Chinese citizen. If you are the ideal Chinese citizen, you get certain perks and blessings. If you're not able to go to certain universities. You're not able to leave the country. You're not able to get a passport to travel. I mean, there are severe consequences if you do not walk in line with what the ideal Chinese citizen is. We'll get into this next week, but the irony is America already has the IT infrastructure for a malevolent government to do the same exact thing to Americans. Now, we're hoping for better, and we can get into talking about how close that is. But it's absolutely scary to think, number one, what's taking place right now in communist China, and then to think that this could be a precursor for what ungodly governments try to do, especially as globalism grows, where now we have a global citizen scorecard. And literally, you can cancel somebody, destroy somebody financially, shut them out of financial markets with the flip of a switch if a group of controllers deems that you're not acting the way you should be acting according to whatever their contingent.
That's why having some type of national electronic monetary credit system or instead of cash is such a dangerous thing. Because we'll get into this all next year. There's a lot we can get into, but this is at the same time horrifying, but at the same time sobering and also awakening for all of us because I think fundamentally Americans are different from Chinese. Speaking from a Chinese background person. So I think there's a lot of hope. But this is sobering, absolutely sobering.
And we have a midterm election, and as we said, the beautiful thing about our American system of government is if we'll work it and take the freedom that we've been given, we can change things around. We can put good people, godly people in office, and we can see our nation turn around. That's our hope. So I do want to mention, too, if you're watching us on Thursday, on Sunday night, this coming Sunday, we'll be having a prayer meeting at our church from 6 to 7. That prayer meeting is going to focus on praying for America, praying for the upcoming election, and just rejoicing that heaven rules, that God is moving in the affairs of men, and that as we seek Him and humble ourselves before Him, He hears our prayers, He answers our prayers, and that's ultimately our hope. So thank you for tuning in. I hope this has been helpful to you. We'll look forward to being together with you next Thursday. Until then, have a great week.